My name is Rick Gibson. I'm the Vice President for Public Affairs and Church Relations here at Pepperdine. I'm happy to be your host today. We have a bit of a role reversal in our webinar today. Usually I'm the one who is in Malibu, but today, though I am your host, I'm the one who's calling in remotely. I'm at a conference here in Washington, D.C., and so I'm calling in from the East Coast, and our presenter, Dr. Tim Spivey, is in Malibu today. So hope you're doing well, Tim. Hope the weather's nice there. It's not nice here.
No, it's a little hazy and cloudy and cool here, actually, Rick.
Yeah, it's wet. It's kind of wet and humid here, so I wish I was back in Malibu. The goal of this series is to encourage and energize church leaders by providing free and practical mini online workshops, and they are being presented by thought leaders and experts from around the country. Just a few instructions before we get started. To eliminate any ambient noise and distractions, all of our guests will be muted. We've mentioned that already. The only voice that you'll hear during the presentation will be of mine and that of the presenter. And again, we'd like to encourage you to think about asking questions and use the chat feature to do that. And I want to make sure that you get your questions to Tim here in just a little bit. So as questions enter your mind, please go ahead and enter them into the chat feature. We'll be able to see that and feed those questions to Tim. And we hope that you will do that. We may not be able to get to all the questions during the live webinar, but we will forward them to the presenter. In this case, Tim, and he'll do his best to respond via email. In a previous session, we asked Mike Cope to help us minister to those in our churches who are experiencing grief. We've asked Tim Pownell to advise us as to how to manage moments of conflict in our churches. During our last session, Alan Beard provided some useful tips for creating communities through social media. Today, in our fourth session, we've invited Dr. Tim Spivey to offer insights into the hiring process. How do we know what positions to hire? What does a healthy hiring process look like in our churches? What traits do capable ministers possess? How do we build a staff and team members that work well together and they'll bear fruit together over many years? Dr. Tim Spivey is the lead planter and minister at the New Vintage Church in San Diego. He's going to help us through some of these questions today. Tim is a preacher, a leadership consultant, public speaker, and author. College Press published his first book, Jesus the Powerful Servant, in 2006. He holds the Bachelor of Arts in Religion, Master of Science in Ministry, and Masters of Divinity, all degrees from Pepperdine University, and he holds the Doctor of Ministry degree from Abilene Christian University. Tim, thanks for being here today.
Thanks. It's my pleasure, Rick. I'm so happy that everybody's tuned in today, and the goal of these seminars is to, in very short time increments, to be able to give you something that will be able to help you. And so we're just going to jump right into it today. And let me begin by just saying, whether your church wants to admit it or not, in all likelihood, who it is that you hire and your ability to recruit and call and choose well who it is that comes to serve at your church, and then to build that into a cohesive team that works together and thrives together over a period of years, may have, at a very practical level, more to do with how the church does the long term than almost anything else. And it's extremely important that you take that seriously. So as we get going today, maybe the first place to start and in building a team is just to understand its importance. But maybe start with this particular question here. A lot of people jump right to the, hey, we have a need, and so give us some names of people that are out there. And I think that's a little bit putting the cart before the horse. This is a very important question to ask, which is our church an environment in which a minister can thrive long term? And a couple of components to that. One is the thriving part. What does that mean? Well, it means that a minister is able to maximize their gifting, the usefulness of their gifts for the purposes of the kingdom, that they're there and they enjoy being there, and that all that person is capable of is unleashed within the life of the church in a very positive way. Long term is really about putting the pieces in place that would facilitate a person wanting to be present in your church for a long time. There is a serious correlation between church growth and health and the tenure of especially the preacher, but also other members of a church staff. And so when you're creating this environment, take a look at your church and maybe ask, is our church what might be called a low staff church, a mid staff church, or a high staff church? Here's what this means. Low staff would be one in which the ministers are kind of viewed, and you have to be really honest with yourself when you're talking about this, thinking through this. A low staff church would be one in which the ministers are typically viewed as kind of a necessary evil. We hire people because we can't really get around to do all of the things that need to be done, and so we just need them to do tasks. But if we didn't have to hire anybody, that would be great. A mid-staff church is, I think, the most common kind, which is that staff is given a little bit of de facto respect because of their role, but not much. Initially, they earn their stripes over the years by doing capable ministry and doing that over some length of time. A high-staff church is one that I think you would want to create as a culture if you really want to be able to recruit and keep staff that are capable and spiritual and have a lot of the features we're going to talk about in just a second. You got to find a way to cultivate a culture that would allow ministers to function as a part of a team and thrive over the long term. And that would mean taking a look at Ephesians 4 and passages like that where you see ministers referred to in the apostles, the prophets, this and that, referred to as the actual gifts that God gives to the church. And a high staff church would understand ministers in that way. Hey, we're blessed to have these men and women with us. They are the hardest working people we know. They are spiritual. We view them as a gift, and we want to make sure that their families are taken care of and that they know that they're loved even as they try to serve us to the best of their ability, okay? So you got low staff, mid staff, high staff. And the more toward the high staff end of the spectrum you are, probably will determine the ability of whether or not a staff will come there and be able to thrive and stay together over the long haul. That's a lengthy process. We don't have, if say you're a low staff church now and you're asking how do we get to the other end of the spectrum, we don't have time to do that one today, but that's a really important question. If you want to contact me somehow on email or otherwise, I'd be happy to talk with you about that. One of the ways that when it comes down to the actual hiring process that can really be of benefit to you is to walk around constantly with a hiring mentality, meaning in my mind, for instance, as I'm here in Malibu all week, and so or all month really, in large part, and I'm thinking through, even as I encounter people, I have a running list in my head of people that I might like to work with someday and how I could see them fitting in at our church. And that may sound a little weird to you. I don't actively recruit everybody to come to our church because obviously I can't or whatever, and haven't had the, we're at a different point in our journey right now where we're not actively hiring people, but what that does is it builds kind of a depth chart into your head, and so when something opens up or your church has the resources to be able to hire, you're not sitting around wondering, oh, gee whiz, who should we, how do we get the word out that we have this position and all of that. You already know who you want. And so that cuts down on the time that it takes, and it really puts, it actually helps cultivate the high staff culture I was talking about before, because you understand the importance and you're looking for it all the time as you go through it. So I would encourage you to, as a church, always have a now hiring mentality. That doesn't mean that you're looking for who you can replace your current ministers with if you find somebody better. Not at all. This is about walking around with a vision for how God could put a team together in your church. So they might be people even that are sitting in the pew at your church, and you just have your eye on them. You just have an eye for how God's using them in the kingdom and watching their growth and development. They might be a college kid that you send off to school. A couple of the people that work on staff at New Vintage Church right now, I followed around in my mind for years before it actually worked out for us to be able to work together. But I'm thankful that it did, and making the time to, just have that as a part of your leadership repertoire is going to serve your church well. I want to encourage you too, as you go through it, this kind of goes with what I just talked about, to be thorough but not slow in your process. People sometimes mistake taking a long time with being thorough, and I found that you can be completely not thorough and slow, and that is frankly a fairly typical pattern where a lot of hiring is done based on resumes and things of that nature, and done through team forms of committees and things like that take a lot of time. And for a candidate to go through a 9-month to a 1-year process is not only grueling from an emotional and spiritual standpoint, but in all likelihood, if they actually are available, all the other churches will probably beat you to it. So the solution is not to not be thorough and just go ahead and just lunge at somebody. It's to have that now hiring mentality all the time, so it gives you the freedom to get to know people intimately when they don't know they're being interviewed. You're getting to know them, and you're not really per se interviewing them, but as you go around, you get to know them. And so when the thing opens up, you've already done the bulk of your interviewing already. You know exactly who it is that you want. And then when you make the decision that you're going to pursue a particular minister, come up with a process that might take somewhere around a month to 6 weeks. In the church world, I know that sounds like rocket speed. It's really not. It's really more of a function of, again, having that now hiring mentality all the time, and then building a process that does not drag on unnecessarily. So even having a situation where a team was always put together and was ready the second that you decided that you were going to hire would be something that could be very helpful to your church. So be thorough, but don't be slow. These are 4 things that I look for. The first 3 are taken from Bill Hybels' book, Courageous Leadership, when he talks about their hiring process at Willow Creek Community Church. I've added one to the end that I found to be very helpful. The first is obviously character at where church is, and we're followers of Jesus, and we want to make sure that whoever comes in is committed to following Jesus. That doesn't mean that they are perfect. It just means that they are committed to a growing relationship with Christ. And that is something that forms the true north of their life. And so obviously that has to be there. Competency, a lot of churches feel guilty about looking for competency in ministers, I've found in doing some consulting with churches, because they feel like that's somehow worldly. I would argue that actually work is extremely spiritual. The concept of vocation and doing everything unto the glory of God is very important. And looking for somebody who actually has the skills that you need and can do the job well, meaning you're not looking for a person, for instance, to just preach on Sundays. You should be looking for somebody who can preach sermons well on Sundays that will actually lead people into the presence of God, help them, equip them to be better students of the Scriptures, and so forth. So you're looking for capable people. And then I would say, look, this is the one where churches get hammered the fastest, is chemistry. And here you're not looking for somebody who can hook it up with everybody else on staff really well, although that's important. You're really looking for people who play well in the sandbox with others. You're looking for people who know how to play as a part of a team. I often will ask questions of people that are maybe a little unorthodox for church hiring processes, but one that I'm prone to ask is, have you ever been a part of a team, and if so, where, and what was your role? It didn't have to be athletics. It could be they were in the military. It could be that they were part of a singing group. But looking for somebody who knows what it's like to work as part of a unit, I found is really helpful as you're just going through the process. So character, competency, chemistry, and then fit. Did it fit our particular church culture? Pace is something I would pay attention to. As our church operated at a really fast pace. When I was serving in Dallas, that was a fast-paced church. Other churches I've been a part of have operated much more slowly, and if you bring somebody who's used to operating at a slow pace into a fast-paced church, they can go through a lot of culture shock. It's actually much harsher the other way when you have a person used to working at warp speed, and now they go into a very slow-moving system. Sometimes there can be some things. It doesn't mean that you should never hire anybody in that regard. It just means that you need to pay attention to it. The culture. At New Vintage Church, we like to laugh. We like that it's a very playful atmosphere. It's very nimble. It's very idea-oriented. So if you're very serious and you don't like joking around, there's certain things about your church culture that this would be a good fit. This would not be a good fit for this person. And then what I look for is, how do they hit the curveball? When something goes really wrong, how do they deal with it? What's their temper like? But by even asking them a question that's likely to make them a little bit upset and seeing how they handle that in the interview process. Curveball hitting, if something goes wrong, as part of our team, we would expect that somebody would be able to learn how to make the best of the situation and then be able to move on without falling apart emotionally or letting it bog them down in all those sorts of ways. One more quick little tidbit here. I would encourage you to look for leaders and not doers when you hire in ministry. And one of the things that happens there is that churches often try to fill a task and they find doers, people that can go do a task, and then they wonder why the church is not involved. And the reason, a lot of that has to do with leadership gifting that draws people to that individual. The doer is going to be more likely also to just take responsibility and do the things that people within the congregation very easily could do, and so it often caps the volunteerism in the church, the spirit of service, because the other person jumps in and does it. A leader is more about trying to draw people into a vision, and so looking for somebody who can lead a youth ministry is different than looking for a youth minister who will spend time with the kids. A leading youth minister would be trying to build a youth ministry. They would be looking for high parent involvement, getting kids involved in service, and those kinds of things. So you're looking for a leader. One way to test if the person's a good leader or not is look to see if they're leading anything before you hire them. If they already have taken the initiative and have made the decision that they're going to, they're going to, try and lead other initiatives. Some churches get very nervous about that because they're covetous of the minister's time. I actually look for it because it's a good sign, hey, they've got a good motor in them too, which leads me to this right here. Always look for intrinsically motivated people. Somebody that has a motor, they've got a passion for God and a passion for ministry. If they had free time, they'd just as soon be doing ministry than doing almost anything else. There's just a motor in them, and the reason is I don't have to manage them, and nobody needs to manage them, and it allows the church to operate at a personnel level in a very nimble way and a very flexible way where you're not as focused on office hours and stuff. You're much more focused on are we getting the job done, and you know that that person will manage themselves, and that if something goes wrong, they will fix it because they can't have it not be fixed. There's an intrinsic motivation to that person so that I don't end up having to go around and micromanage people or manage people. Elders don't need to manage them. Nobody needs to manage them because they're self-managed. So those are just some, in 15 minutes, there's kind of a fire hydrant of stuff that I would give you and just ask you to take it and find what's useful. And if you want to talk further, we can do that via email.
Well, Tim, thank you so much. I really appreciate this topic, and clearly so do many of our guests. We have quite a few questions that have come in. Let me see if I can get as many in the time that we have. Are you ready to take a couple?
Absolutely.
Good. One question that came in was stated this way. What do you think about dual relationships on staff? For example, the church secretary happens to be the preacher's or elder's wife. If you're for that or if you're against that, how would you go about remedying the situation?
Well, from a nepotism situation, I'm taking a conflict of interest angle on that question is what I'm picking up. If that's wrong, then let me know. If you're talking about somebody occupying multiple roles, I don't think that's a problem. If you're talking, though, about an elder's wife or a minister's wife or something like that, in general, I don't think that's a very healthy thing, especially if you have the people at the top, whether that's a senior minister figure or whether that's an eldership, and there isn't a clear line of authority around that power structure. My experience with it in consulting probably is that half of the conflicts that I've seen involve a conflict of interest situation between elders and ministers, and either the minister didn't do a good job of drawing some boundaries or the elder didn't. And so you have an elder's wife that's done X or Y, or the elder himself has taken up an office and is doing that, or a minister hasn't drawn the line very well, and it's his wife or one of his children or something like that that's in there. I just think, I'm not saying it's impossible to do that and do it well, but boy, it would take a pretty differentiated elder and elder's wife to be able to do that well. So as far as how to get out of it, I think probably the only way out of that, I don't know that you can undo it unless the existing elders or minister, staff, whoever it is that's responsible for personnel, has some delicate conversations and leads through a change process. It's really the only way out. And if that elder or elder's wife or whomever is unwilling to step out of that role, that probably guarantees you have a problem there because of the coveting of that position. And so you really probably need to appeal to the eldership as a whole or to whoever's doing the hiring to do that. But in general, I'm not really a fan of that. I think it produces a lot of tension and problems and tiptoeing around each other and those kinds of things that make working harder.
Yeah. Tim, there's a similar question that's come in, I think maybe in response to some of what you're saying. More and more churches seem to be hiring elders, or elders. An elder becomes part of the staff team in some way. I'm assuming that happens in several different ways. But we're seeing more of that, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about models where you've seen that work, concerns that you might have about that. Obviously, there can be some complexity to relationships like that.
Yeah, I've been a part of ones where it's worked, actually from personal experience, where it's worked quite well. But again, it comes down to who the person is. I'll just name him. George Baker, when I worked with him at Highland Oaks, was a magnificent elder to work with. But that worked because he was so well differentiated as a leader. He knew not to put on his elder hat unless he was asked to put it on when he was on staff. And in an elders meeting, he really walked the line of staff member elder extremely well. So I guess I would say it can be done. A lot of times it happens because elders will work for less money, and they often have experience and they have time when they're retired and such. Just make sure that that person's a well differentiated person, that they have a sense of who they are, where they end and you begin, and where their eldering ends and staff begins. And if so, I think it can work. I've been in other situations where people didn't know how to draw those boundaries, and it produced a lot of tension and made it difficult because you never knew when they were going to put the elder hat on. So, you know, the other thing you need to know is that getting rid of a person, if you bring them on, can be very difficult. So there ought to be a plan on the front side for how that transition would happen if it doesn't work out. And just talk openly with the elders before that hire is made. And so everybody understands what the game is, what's being played when it happens. But it can be, it's possible that it would work.
Yeah, very good. A couple more questions. Obviously, there's great interest in this topic. Let me kind of throw a very practical question that's come through. How do you find or tap into a good pool of possible candidates for any kind of job, whether it be a children's minister, a pulpit or preaching minister, a youth minister? Where do you find these people?
You know, again, the way I personally do it is I have the now hiring mentality all the time. And so there's usually a pool of people there. Now, if you haven't done that and you're kind of trying to get that going, so meaning I have a running chart in my head almost every position that we might need, and 3, 4, 5 people on that radar, and always looking for more. If you aren't there and you don't feel like that's even a good idea or whatever, I would encourage you to get around a little bit and go to the big events that happen, the Pepperdine Bible Lectures, Tulsa, ACU. Those tend to be places where a lot of those conversations take place. In the past, church relations here at Pepperdine, if you're looking for something on the West Coast, ACU in the middle. The Churches of Christ really are organized around the schools, and the schools often know where the best talent is and who's looking, because either people have degrees from there and are checking in to let them know they're looking to make a transition, or you can go to those large events and just kind of put the word out that somebody's looking, that you're looking, and somehow mysteriously it happens. Churches of Christ have an odd way of finding each other, despite the lack of a denominational structure or anything like that to help lead the way. So
Tim,
I would say go to those big events and all that stuff.
Tim, I know you work with and consult with other church organizations, other denominational organizations. How are some of the how are others structured in that regard? Are they networked differently? Is there anything you've learned from the way some other churches do it?
Yeah, in the independent Christian churches, for instance, that's probably who I do the most work with outside the Churches of Christ. They're organized, they wouldn't see it this way, but in my experience, they're organized around the mega churches. So they're big churches. It's almost understood one of their roles is, especially the more seasoned ones with guys that are in the later part of their ministry. Those guys serve, like Lynn Anderson has served within Churches of Christ over the years as a matchmaking minister. And so Bob Russell, for instance, he tends to know who's looking for what, and he views that as part of his ministry, matchmaking, and it happens through the larger churches. I've seen, for instance, in like fellowship Bible churches, you know, that there are 4 to 5 of those that tend to play that similar role, and so it happens very much through the churches. I mean, obviously, if you're, you know, Roman Catholic or something, there's a much more rigid, or not rigid, but just clear-cut way that that kind of thing happens. But usually it's the church. If it's not the schools, it functions in the churches. Sometimes, I mean, people have put things out in the Christian Chronicle or things like that, but more and more it's really happening through relationship. So it's who's having coffee with who knows who, and the universities within Churches of Christ have served that function for years. Especially, I would argue, ACU has done that. Yeah. Pepperdine's played that role, especially in the West Coast. You know, Lipscomb's, David Fleer and that group's starting to do that now out there. And that's a big need because there's a lot of shifting going on right now. And churches that are looking, so it's a vital role.
There is a big need. I have to say that if I were to evaluate most of the questions coming in right now, they are networking questions. They are trying to understand how do we connect, and I can see where the schools, perhaps even church relations at Pepperdine, can play a greater role in the future. One last question for now. We really are running out of time. You mentioned about hiring within, and we're wondering just how do congregations accept staff that are hired from within? We've often known that a prophet is without honor in his own hometown. So how does that work, Tim?
Well, by the time that, for instance, at Highland Oaks, we got to a point where we pretty much only hired from inside eventually. But that takes a lot of time to get there, and that's usually a larger church's. That's a benefit of being in a larger church because you just got a better crop of people there. A larger crop is what I mean. If you make the decision to hire, I would say that the way that they're viewed by the congregation when they step into the staff role is going to have a lot to do with whether you're a low, mid, or high staff church. So if it's a church that respects staff a lot, then that will be a positive move for them in the eyes of the church. If you have a low staff church, it'll probably make their life miserable. They probably have more respect sitting in the pew. And so they will feel this sense of, hey, everybody was nice to me. How come they're like not treating me with any respect anymore? And if they're at a mid-level church, it's kind of like somewhere in between those two extremes. But in my experience, hiring them has a lot more to do with that dynamic and how the church culture is towards staff in general that determines how they're viewed. One thing on that really quickly is I would really encourage you, don't look over the pew, meaning you don't have to look outside. There are often, especially for certain roles in the church, you can find really capable people in the pews, and the fear has always been in Churches of Christ often that, they don't have theological training, and there's some stuff, I mean, obviously preaching or certain things, that becomes more important, but for church administration, perhaps even youth ministry or campus ministry or things like that. A lot of those have a lot to do with emotional IQ, and not to be like cynical or anything like that, but sometimes that's a more valuable set of gifts in certain roles and knowledge of the church, and you already know that the people buy into the vision of the church and all of that, and it does. There's no learning curve generally. The learning curve is much smaller, I should say. And so when they come in, they can actually just go ahead and hit the ground running. They have to learn how to work on the team, and they have to learn how the church works from the inside. But that's a lot easier than flying in from another part of the country and then having to get to know everybody in the church and all that stuff. So I'm a big fan of hiring from within if you have people that actually are capable. Don't just do it as a way of getting out of having to be rigorous in your selection process, though.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thank you so much. There have been many questions that have been pouring in over this, and there are more even coming in now. Thank you for leading this in this thoughtful discussion. There's great interest in this process, the hiring process, networking, and I do think there are some ways in which Pepperdine in particular could be maybe more helpful in the future. Let me invite our listeners, if you have further questions, let me invite you to reach out to Tim by email. I have his email up on the screen now. Hopefully you're seeing that. You can reach him at tim@newvintagesd.org. To let you know, today's presentation has been recorded and will be available online at the Pepperdine University Church Relations website shortly. The others from our previous sessions are already posted and are online, and you can view them and share them as you choose. They can all be reviewed again and shared with others, and we encourage you to do so. Our next presentation is on June 26th. Dr. Connie Horton, who is an associate vice president here at Pepperdine and works with our counseling center, will be leading us in a session entitled, Where is God in This? Stress and Coping from a Christian Worldview. Connie is terrific. I know she'll offer some great insight into this topic, one that is meaningful to all of us. As I mentioned maybe earlier, Dr. Horton's presentation will be our last presentation in this pilot series. For those of you who are new to this program, you should know that we decided to do a six program series, and Connie's will be our final series. We're going to spend some time this summer evaluating this project, and we will consider ways to strengthen it and expand its reach. If you have feedback that you'd like to share, please email me directly at rick.gibson@pepperdine.edu. We'll also let you know that we will be sending you a brief survey in the near future to get some more feedback, and that will help us improve the program. Thanks so much for being a part of our program today. Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you on June 26th with Dr. Connie Horton. Thanks so much.